जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्रजाकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्री श्रीमती डिवाइन ग्रेस शिल भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज शिल प्रभुपाद की. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories, all glories, all glories to Sri Guru and Sri Gauranga. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudhirayet Nashtaprayeshu Vabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, Chapter 14, text number 10. Ditiruvacha Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kamata Sharasanaha Kama Ata Sharasanaha Dunoti Dinam Vikramya Dunoti Dinam Vikramya Rambhamiva Matangata Gaja Rambhamiva Matangajaha Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kama Ata Sharasanaha Dunoti Dinam Vikramya Rambhamiva Matangajaha. Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kama Ata Sharasanaha Dunoti Dinam Vikramya Rambhamiva Matangajaha. Tiruvacha Mam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kama Hata Sharasanaha Dunoti Dinam Rambhamiva Matangajaha. Ditiruvacha Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kama Hata Sharasanaha Dunoti Dinam Vikramya Rambhamiva Matangajaha. Mataji. Ditiruvacha Eshamam Tvat Krite Vidvan Kama ata sharasanaha. Dunoti dinam vikramya. Rambamiva matangajaha. Word for word translation. Ditiro vacha. Beautiful Diti said. Eshaha. All these. Mam. Unto me. Tvat krite. For you. Vidvan. O learned one. Kamaha. Cupid. Ata sharasanaha. Taking his arrows. Dunoti. Distresses. Dinam. Poor me. Vikramya. Attacking. Rambham. Banana tree. Iva. Like. Matam gajaha. Mad elephant. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. In that place, the beautiful Diti expressed her desire. O learned one, Cupid is taking his arrows and distressing me forcibly as a mad elephant troubles a banana tree. Purport. Beautiful Diti, seeing her husband absorbed in trance, began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions. She frankly said that her whole body was distressed by sex desire because of her husband's presence, just as a banana tree is troubled by a mad elephant. It was not natural for her to agitate her husband when he was in trance, but she could not control her strong sexual appetite. Her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. Om Jnanatirmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamhayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradhayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratvashe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. I request blessings from all the Vaishnavas present, that I may properly represent Srila Prabhupada, his instructions, purify my heart and give pleasure to the Vaishnavas present, both here and online. This verse starts a narration, actually started from 2 verses previously by Maitreya Muni to Vidura. Because Vidura had asked a question. He has just heard the pastime of Varahadev fight and conquer Hiranyaksha. And he's curious about why this fight started in the first place. And going back almost to first causes, Maitreya begins to narrate about what had happened. And he begins this history with this one point, that Diti one time desired progeny from her husband. The context in which she desired this progeny is described. In text number 8, it is said, Sandhyayam, that she desired union at the confluence of the day and nighttime. Now, this is actually an incredibly inauspicious time for such conception to take place. It is very auspicious to remember the Supreme Lord, and as we shall see, Kashyapa was absorbed in meditation. We have that verse, Dhyayan stuvam stasya yashastri sandhyam vande guru shri charanara vindam. Particularly the confluences of the day are for remembering the Supreme Lord or the spiritual master. And Kashyapa Muni, as is stated in text number 9, was in Nimlochati Arka Asinam Agni Agare Samahitam. So he was Agni Agare means in the fire hall, or in the place where the sacrificial fire was kept constantly burning. So he was there and he was offering oblations of payasa, of sweet rice, into the fire. Basically, he was offering bhoga to the Supreme Lord, because the fire represents the tongue of the Lord. And samahitam. The phrase samahitam is important because it indicates the absorption of Kashyapa Muni. He was actually completely absorbed in devotional service. And these terms, sandhyayam, agni agare, and samahitam, indicate the strength of Diti's desire and the inappropriateness of pushing Kashyapa for conception at this particular time. Because generally speaking, it's almost like, imagine a devotee is absorbed in kirtan here, and his or her partner comes into the temple room, does not offer obeisances, shakes the devotee out of kirtan, and because they can't, if there's a roaring kirtan going on, you can't just talk from the door. You can't just come in and say, excuse me, can you just come here? It's almost like you take the mic and you shake the person. Please stop, I need to talk to you. I need this now. That was literally what Diti did. It is mentioned that she was very, very direct in her statements. She just said, Esha mam tvat krite vidvan. You have caused me to feel this way. I need you to satisfy me right now. This is practically unheard of in Vedic culture. Generally speaking, people are very, very subtle in their expressions, particularly for something like this. They're very, very subtle, shy, and they wait for the right time to express their desire. But Diti's desire was so strong that she entered into the sacrificial area. She spoke loudly. It is mentioned, Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, seeing her husband absorbed in trance, she couldn't just, by feminine gestures, she couldn't attract him. She couldn't, sit before him shyly and express her desire in a way that he would understand, because his eyes were closed and he was absorbed in samadhi, our acharyas say. And she had to speak not softly, not even sweetly. She had to speak loudly, directly in such a way that it shook him out of his trance. Absorbed in trance, began to speak loudly, not attempting to attract him by bodily expressions, because his eyes were closed. And here are her words. Esha mam. The word Esha indicates how much she felt Cupid personified was standing in front of her. Esha, can you not see this? Esha indicates that it's right in front of me. This Esha, this Kama is standing right here. Can't you see this? Mam, for me, tvat krite, this is your fault. Had I been alone, I wouldn't have this problem. Because you're here, I'm facing this. So it's your job to make me feel better. Esha mam tvat krite vidvan. Vidvan indicates you are learned. You're supposed to know what to do under these circumstances. Kama ata sharasanaha. So this Cupid has got his arrows, and he's shooting me with these arrows continuously. He's wounding my heart. Dunoti, meaning distress. The word dunoti is supposed to indicate chivalrous feelings in her husband. I am being distressed. Somebody has captured me and is torturing me. Somebody is giving me pain. I need you as my husband to stand up and protect me at this time. That's what's indicated by the phrase dunoti. And so therefore, Prabhupada in the purport says, her sex desire was like a mad elephant, and therefore it was the prime duty of her husband to give her all protection by fulfilling her desire. This was Diti's perspective. So kama ata sharasana dunoti. Dinam, I'm a victim here. I'm very, very poor. Vikramya. And it's attacking me, and it's almost like Kashyapa could ask, can you not just wait a little while? Why do you want to, why are you giving up so much of your culture? Why are you coming here and saying this? And her response is, Rambham eva matangaja. It's like, an elephant comes in and is ready to uproot a banana tree, meaning that the banana tree is going to lose its life. That's how she felt. She was like, I can come, I know I'm not supposed to come in the temple room and stop the kirtan, but I'm going to die. If I'm going to die, none of this matters. So I'm coming here and I'm telling you that I'm about to be completely uprooted. I need you to do something right here, right now. And that was what she was trying to convey. She was trying to convey the intensity and the urgency of her desire. Now, Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't go into a lot of detail in terms of why she was feeling so strongly in this particular way. But nonetheless, her desire was born out of a combination of passion and ignorance. In a later verse, it is mentioned that she indicated, and this is, I think, verse number 14. Here it is indicated that she had, along with 12 of her other sisters, the 13 daughters of Daksha, were given in marriage to Kashyapa. And she's indicating in those words that it's not directly mentioned in the verse, but Prabhupada mentions it in the translation, and it's implied in what she's saying. 13 of us have married you, and I'm the only one who's yet to have a child from you. And her point is that I can't be the only one to just be left aside like this. A wife is made auspicious or is given, becomes famous in the world when her husband gives a child like himself within her own womb. So the husband, with all his good qualities, is born again through the mother. And the mother becomes glorified in the world in this way. And the father himself, she's implying, becomes glorified when you get such a glorious son. And I can't be the only one to be excluded when my sisters all have children. So I need a child now. That's what's indicated in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And Kashyapa, he heard what Diti had to say. There's a verse 16. In verse 16, the two things that Diti expresses is expressed in the second line. It is said, Iti tam vira maricha kripanam bahubhashinim. So this phrase, the second line, kripanam and bahubhashinim, indicate the two kinds of things that Diti has expressed. Kripanam is indicated in verses 10 and 11, where Diti is expressing how much she's being distressed by her desire. In those two verses it is expressed. And bahubhashini means just talking. When you want to get something done, you just keep talking. Like you chew the other person's ear off. No, can you please do this? Can you please give me this? I need this now. Please don't hesitate. I'm having difficulty. See, I told you we needed this yesterday. I needed the shopping done yesterday. You can't leave me like this. I know you have other work, but I also have needs. You have to take care of me. I married you for this. You were not like this before marriage. You don't love me at all. How can you not? This is called bahubhashini. Just talking, and you. It's not necessarily a logical set of reasons. It comes from one's emotions. Both actually come from one's emotions. You always put me in this situation. I can't live like this. I am suffering here. I've not eaten properly for 2 days. I need something now. So that's an expression of how terrible one is feeling. And then something like, you promised me this before marriage, you said you would do this, you've done this for others, you've gone and given 2 other classes, now I need you to do this for me. That's bahubashini. Just extra talking in order to convince one's spouse of one's point. And so in both ways, expressing her own, the intensity of her distress, and in emotionally charging her statements towards her husband, she has tried to induce him to get what she wants. It is not that Kashyapa was unaware of the problem with what she was asking, but he was not actually very strong. Later on, it is shown that Kashyapa becomes angry with Diti, and he speaks quite harsh words. He says that you have ignored this Sandhya time, you've ignored my instructions, you've ignored the Devatas, and for all of these reasons, you will get 2 very cruel children. And he says this in a way by which he directs his anger towards her. But in verse 16, the phrase Veera is used by Maitreya to address Vidura. By the phrase Veera, what Maitreya is telling Vidura is, you are a hero because you have the determination and the strength of conviction to handle such situations. By that phrase, he's indicating that Kashyapa was not actually fully determined. He was not prepared to put his foot down and just stop things right there. The acharyas indicate that had Kashyapa just put his foot down and said, no, keep quiet, out. Had he said something like that in a forceful way, even raising his voice or pretending, acharyas say, to show his anger, then out of fear, the intensity of Diti's desire would have been suppressed for that time. And Kashyapa could have pacified her later. Kashyapa chose instead, and if you look from verse 17, the phrase is Esha teham vidhashyami. I will satisfy your desire. Don't worry, my darling. You are everything for me. I will make sure you're satisfied. I'll make sure you're taken care of. Just give me a little time. Now, when somebody has that entire force of passion for whatever it may be, you try and mollify them. It's almost like holding up a small umbrella in the face of a typhoon. Your umbrella is just going to get uprooted and you're going to get thrown back. In fact, it might even prod the other person to increase the intensity because they sense weakness in their particular authority. And the force of their expression, the force of their desire will increase. And that was actually Kashyapa's fault. Recognizing Diti's position, recognizing that she was incapable of viewing the situation objectively, or she was incapable of allowing her intelligence to work. He should have just stepped in and showing his anger in pretense for her benefit, for their benefit, for the world's benefit, just stopped it and nipped it in the bud. Baldevidya Bhushan, in the 3rd chapter of Bhagavad Gita, he says that Sama, Dana, Beda, Danda are 4 means of conciliating an enemy. But he says the enemy of lust can only be hit with Danda. There's no other way. When you have that force, you have to hit it. There's no other way of disturbing that lust. You have to hit your head, or you have to literally beat it out of yourself at that particular point in time when it's that intense. Point being, if you don't cut it off, you try and mollify it in some way, you try and find another outlet for it, it will just increase in its intensity. So that was actually Kashyapa's mistake. But he wasn't very strong in putting his foot down at that time. Nonetheless, he did try to stop Diti. Subsequent verses will reveal that extensively, practically from verse 19 onwards up to verse something or the other, he continuously gives her instructions. I will pacify you, don't worry. How will I not pacify you? You're my wife. By having you as my wife, the fortress of the material body is protected. And, but we should also respect Shiva. He's your brother-in-law, and one should know his position. One should know that he roams around with other ghosts at this time. One should respect him. And his intention was, if we can, let us keep talking until the Sandhya time is over, until that inauspicious time is over. It's almost like when I was younger, I wanted to get a tattoo. I had seen from the Mayapuris, is it Vishwambar Prabhu. So I saw his Shankha and Chakra, and I really wanted a tattoo. I was maybe 19 at the time. And I was telling my parents, I'm going to get one. I just started earning some money by tutoring people also. I was like, I have got my money, I'm going to get myself some tattoos. And my mother was like, no, you're not getting yourself any tattoos. And my desire was increasing. My father just told me one thing. He said, just wait 1 month. If after 1 month you still have this desire, you go get it. He was actually quite smart. Within a couple of weeks, I was like, no, I don't want it anymore. So there's a phrase that's actually that is spoken. If something is auspicious, one should do it immediately. This is actually a trick in dealing with the material world. If something is auspicious, one should do it immediately. If something is inauspicious, one delays until such time you have to do it. You have no choice. Because time is a very important factor. And sometimes if you just wait, you just give it some time, the situation changes, people's perspective changes. And the thing that you thought you would be forced to do, you don't have to do anymore. And that's actually a trick in dealing with the material world. In the Ramayana, there's a lesson which is taught in relationship with the day before Ravana passed away. So this was the night before the final battle between Sri Ramachandra and Ravana. And Sri Ramachandra called Lakshman. He said, come here. And Lakshman offered a obeisance. He said, my dear brother, tell me, what do you want? And Sri Ramachandra said, I want you to go to Ravan. Okay, you want me to go to him? What do you want me to do to him? And he was like, I want you to go as a disciple. What? As a disciple? No, he's not worthy of being a spirit. No, I'm telling you, you need to go to him as a disciple. Why? He said, because at this last stage of his life, he knows he's going to die. He understands that very clearly. He has just fought a tremendous battle with me this afternoon and evening, and he has lost the battle, almost lost his life, and he knows tomorrow will be his final day. Now, if you go to him now, he'll be reviewing his entire life within his mind. And the essence of all the wisdom that he wants to impart to you, he will be able to impart it if you go in the right mood. If you go as a disciple, he will give it to you. And this will be very useful. So go to him as a disciple. So Lakshmana went to Ravana and he approached Ravana as a disciple. So he offered respects to Ravana and he said, I've been commanded to approach you to seek instructions from you. So Ravana was sitting like this, and he was quite morose. He had been reviewing how his actions had caused this entire devastation, how his entire family, how the entire dynasty of Rakshasas had been almost destroyed. And he said, you know, Lakshman, there was one time when I wanted to create a staircase to heaven. And it was my idea that I could send, people to heaven. And I wanted to help others. Had I done that at that time, by now I would have received so many blessings from so many people. And had I just, when I had that forceful desire to abduct Sita, I could think of nothing else. I was instigated by Shurpanaka. My uncle Marichi, he tried to talk me out of this desire. I wouldn't listen. But had I just waited, that intensity of the desire would have reduced and I wouldn't have performed this particular activity. So my only instruction to you is this. If there's something auspicious, do it immediately so that you will not regret not doing it later. Whatever it may be. Imagine you have a little bit of time to chant Krishna's names. Take up a beat and chant. Sometimes we only have 5 minutes in the middle of the day to read Prabhupada's books, or sometimes when we are standing in a queue, we have the chance to hold Prabhupada's books for 5 minutes and just read a little paragraph somewhere. But that 5 minutes, once it's gone, and the rest of the day just goes as it must go. But if we can take the time to do something auspicious at that time, then we just do it. And if something is inauspicious, an example of such an inauspicious thing is maybe we are forced to, in a family function, go and take part in a conversation or in a meal that is difficult. You delay such an event as long as possible. But when it becomes inevitable, you do it. And sometimes you find just by giving something time, that thing goes away. Or if there is a disagreement that one has to have, and the context is not very palatable, the people are not very inclined towards that discussion. Sometimes you just give it time, and with time, the perspective of the individuals change. And then when you have a conversation, it can be different. May not be different, but it can be different. So the phrase is Shubhasya Shigram, Ashubhasya Dirgam. Shubhasya, if something is auspicious, Shigram, do it as quickly as you can. Or Ashubhasya, if something is inauspicious, Dirgam, just give it some time and do it then. And that was a strategy that Kashyapa tried to employ. In this situation, it failed because Diti forcibly caught hold of Kashyapa's dress. And the phrase used is like a prostitute, meaning that she lost her shame and she lost her reservation. She gave up her culture to such an extent that she was willing to cast aside any consideration of right and wrong, proper and improper, in order to satisfy her desire. And so that activity is compared to that of a prostitute. But this particular verse in text number 10, it initiates this by speaking of Diti's particular distress and the intensity of her desire which she's expecting her husband to satisfy. Now, if you contrast this in the 6th canto of Bhagavatam, Diti again approaches Kashyapa for conception. This happens in the last chapter of the 6th canto of Bhagavatam, which is titled the Pumsavana Vrata. Now, under those circumstances, Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha had both been killed by the Lord. So Hiranyaksha had been killed by Varahadev, and Hiranyakashipu had been killed by Lord Nrsingadev. But she blamed Indra for their deaths, because Indra was their specific enemy. She felt like Indra had taken particular enmity which had invoked Vishnu's retaliation. And she couldn't quite understand why Vishnu had appeared and retaliated against her children in that way. She was thinking that somehow Vishnu is somehow partial to Indra, and he's against my sons. Either way, Indra is the cause of the Lord coming and killing my own children. So she approached her husband, and this time she took effort to satisfy her husband completely. She served him, she took care of him, she attended to his every need as he was serving the Supreme Lord. And Kashyapa became very, very, his heart melted for Diti. And he was like, this lady, my wife has done so much for me. She has sacrificed so much for my particular service. It is my obligation. I should also do something to please her. I should also do something to make her happy. What he didn't ascertain, however, was the particular nature of her desire. And here is what Diti says. When Kashyapa asks her, here's what Kashyapa says. O my dear one, the most powerful sage Kashyapa, being extremely pleased by the mild behavior of his wife Diti, smiled and spoke to her as follows. Kashyapa said, O beautiful woman, O irreproachable lady, since I am very much pleased by your behavior, you may ask me for any benediction you want. If a husband is pleased, what desires are difficult for his wife to obtain, either in this world or in the next? And then he says, my dear wife, because you have worshipped me with great devotion, considering me a representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, I shall reward you by fulfilling your desires, which are unobtainable for an unchaste wife. Aditi replied, O my husband, O great soul, I have now lost my sons. If you want to give me a benediction, I ask for this. I ask you for an immortal son who can kill Indra. I pray for this because Indra, with the help of Vishnu, has killed my two sons, Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu. So Aditi had learned something from the first request. She was aware of the importance of time, place, and circumstances. She was aware of the importance of the mood of affection that she needed towards her husband to get proper progeny. In fact, I think for every one of Aditi's transgressions, there was a particular element of Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu's consciousness that was so formed. I think because of her brazen attitude, the two sons were very cruel. Because of coming at the Sandhya time, which has two divisions, she had two sons. Because of her disrespect towards Lord Shiva as a devotee of the Lord, her two sons were envious of Vishnu. So in this way, because of particular transgressions, there was a particular effect on the child's consciousness. So this time round, Aditi was very careful. She avoided the Sandhya time. She was very careful to approach her husband with a mood of service and to invoke his pleasure. The problem she forgot was her own internal motivation. And when she uttered this, Kashyapa was like, what have I gotten myself into yet again? Now she wants to kill the servant that Krishna has placed to coordinate the affairs of the entire universe. Indra doesn't deserve to die because it was Hiranyakashipu and Hiranyaksha's fault. In fact, right after this first conception, the third canto, I had told Aditi what the effect of her consciousness would be. It's not Indra's fault. This was the fault of what happened at that time. Now she wants to kill Indra because she's blaming him, and this is not right. But this time round, Kashyapa was very, very intelligent. He understood again the force of Aditi's desire. See, the force previously was overt. This time the force was more internal. And she controlled her external behavior in order to fulfill her internal desire. But sometimes the internals are actually harder to purify than the externals. And so this time round, what Kashyapa did instead was he thought, first he blamed himself. He said, it is my fault. It's not her fault. Because she's just acting according to what her nature. She has not received an opportunity like me to have her heart purified by devotional service to the Lord. But I am a fool. I should have known that I, as a husband, have the duty and responsibility, because he's also her spiritual master. The spiritual master cannot say, tell me, disciple, whatever you want, I will do it for you. And the disciple says, my dear spiritual master, I want you to, play holy with me. And it's like, what? That's completely befitting a relationship between spiritual master and disciple. I should have made sure I asked the right thing before. I should have made sure that my disciple was mature enough to make a proper request before granting, carte blanche in offering any benediction that was possible. And so then he says, I will have to purify her heart, and I will do so through the medium of devotional service to the Lord. So in the guise of allowing Aditi to get what she wants a son who's fit to kill Indra. I will introduce her to a particular type of devotional service to the Lord known as the Pumsavana Vrata. By this, Vishnu will be very pleased. And by her absorption in serving Vishnu, because this Pumsavana Vrata constituted rituals in morning, afternoon, evening, and nighttime. And it was a very, very strict vow. Now one can ask, what has internal bhakti got to do with external circumstances? And the idea is this. When you regulate your day, or when morning to evening, your hand and feet are almost tied down in offering respects to Vishnu, in offering services in some way, the mind is forced to become absorbed in the Lord. And so, because Aditi was still very much, her consciousness was external, but at the same time, she was a very, very chaste and obedient wife to her husband. Kashyapa gave her a prescription which she very dutifully followed, and he knew she would dutifully follow. He gave her a prescription that would completely engage her senses, completely engage her mind, and force her to be purified. And when Diti was thus purified by devotional service, her enmity changed. And rather than getting children who would be enemies of Indra, they ended up being among the greatest devotees of the Lord. They became the Maruts, the Devatas who managed the prana around the universe. But that was the example of Diti and her process. Kashyapa was more intelligent this time round. He didn't. Previously, he was trying to manage the situation and delay things. But that's only a solution under a limited number of circumstances. One should know always that the real purification of one's heart, the real way to transcend difficulties and problems and difficult desires, is to find a way to connect one's desire to Krishna or to become absorbed in devotional service. And Kashyapa recognized that the first time, and the second time round, he made sure that it was implemented. One time His Holiness Bhakti Charu Maharaj was going around Pune, and he was just asking Radheshyam Prabhu, who is the temple president there, Radheshyam Prabhu, just so tell me, what are the problems here? What are you trying to manage? What are you trying to achieve as a yatra over the next few years? And Radheshyam Prabhu was explaining their vision. He was also explaining the difficulties that the yatra was trying to solve. And he was expressing, there's this issue, there's that issue, there's this issue. Bhakti Charan Maharaj was just listening. At the end, he just said, my experience in dealing with so many managements over the past so many years has been that you cannot actually extinguish fires individually. Really, you have to elevate the consciousness of the devotees in general. And when their consciousness is elevated, these problems in and of themselves, they just go away. And he said, Radheshyam Prabhu, I'm requesting you, why don't you start regular Shastric study? Teach the devotees. You have Bhagavad Gita classes already. Teach them Srimad Bhagavatam. Teach them Chaitanya Charitamrita. And elevate the Vaishnava's consciousness. Because when somebody hears about Krishna and becomes absorbed in Krishna, the different psychological imbalances that one has, the holes in one's heart one has from difficulties in one's childhood or upbringing or what have you, which creates particular psychological needs and that are expressed in the form of either excessive lust or anger or some other form of perversion, that is automatically cut down at its root. It may be an interim solution to initially confront somebody. And everybody who's been in any kind of a relationship, whether it's a husband-wife or with a brother-sister or brother-brother relationship, one knows when there's something wrong that's happening in the conversation, you can go and you can confront a person directly. You can shout it out, you can fight it out, and that resolves a limited number of such disputes. Really, it leaves a lot of issues still within an individual. You can go to the next level of dealing with a person's emotions. You can try and understand what the root cause of those emotions is. Some difficulty in childhood, some bad experiences with family, some difficulties with the husband or with the wife that carry on years after something has happened. And you can try and objectively distance oneself from those things and somehow just try and go on and move on. The real solution actually is to take to devotional service. Because by devotional service, one attains Krishna's shelter and one learns to transcend these different gaps, holes, or needs that one has. And one automatically grows in one's character. And these problems are actually left aside. There's another example. There's a devotee in Vrindavan. I think he was initially trained by Radheshyam Prabhu, and he manages the ashram in Vrindavan. I forget Prabhuji's name, but he manages the Prabhupada Vani ashram, for those who know what that is. So whenever devotees approach him for counseling, the very first thing he does is he opens Srimad Bhagavatam, and he says, come, let's just sit and let's read for half an hour. And then they read Srimad Bhagavatam together. It could be any portion. It's not specific to the discussion that the devotee wants to have. They read Srimad Bhagavatam for half an hour. And then he says, okay, now let's discuss. And when they start discussing, The devotees very often find that the complex problem they had in mind has simplified itself considerably. And the solution is actually very clear. And sometimes it can almost certainly be dismissed. Because, and Radhanath Maharaj says this, and it's really important. He says, when the heart is satisfied, the mind is automatically at peace. But he says, a disturbed heart will create an agitated mind, and no amount of talking, finding solutions, finding a better way to communicate or talk can resolve those underlying problems. So this pastime with Diti eventually has a wonderful conclusion. Because Diti, she regretted her particular actions as expressed in this particular instance. She regretted those actions and she sought to grow in her own way. She was very, very qualified as a wife. She was very, very qualified as a person. But her nature was to be absorbed in passion and ignorance. But over time, with her husband's direction, her spiritual master's instructions, she grew, and eventually that mode of passion and ignorance was taken away. How do you know that there's passion and ignorance in her character? Well, by the effects. There's a verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita. It comes in Antya Leela in chapter 1, where Srila Rupa Goswami comes to meet the Lord for the second time. And there's Lord Chaitanya was singing one verse in the Rath Yatra, and many of the Vaishnavas have heard this verse before. I am that same girl, and here is the same boy, and we are meeting at this particular time by this river, but I wish we could go back to the situation of my childhood and experience the same relationship we had there. And of course he spoke it in such a way, it was almost like it was a pop song at that time. Rupa Goswami, however, understood the Lord's intentions, and he composed a verse expressing the Lord's innermost desire. And he stuck it up in the thatchet of his particular kutir. The Lord came and he saw that verse and he showed it to, he was astonished. And he took that verse and he showed it to Swarup Damodar Goswami. He said, how is it possible that Sri Rupa has understood my innermost intentions? And Swarup Damodar Goswami looked at it and he said, Falena falakaranam anumiyate. Falena means by the fruit, falakaranam, the cause of that fruit, anumiyate means one can infer. And then he quotes this particular verse, which is a verse, I think, from the Padma Puran. He says, Swarga paga hema mrinalinam, nana mrina lagra bhujho bhajamaha, annan rupam tanurupa riddhim karyam nidhana di gunan adite. And here is this verse by the residents of the heavenly planets. They're saying, we eat the top of the stems of the lotus flower. And that is why our body is so lustrous and effulgent and capable of so many things. And the sentence they say is, Karyam nidhana di gunan adite. The modes of nature that one puts into the body is seen by the particular effects that the body has. If one notices, like for example, that one's body is becoming very oily or getting boils or it's tired all the time, one can understand that because of the things I'm eating, either it's too spicy or it's not suitable for my body, it's usually in the modes of passion or ignorance, that I'm feeling this extra oily, extra tired element of my body. Or if one notices that one's energy is high, one's enthusiasm is very, very bright, one understands by this that one is taking proper shelter of devotional service. And one's body is also regulated, eating the right things at the right time, doing the right things at the right time. So this is actually really important, because by the effects one can understand what we are doing that is right or wrong that is causing those effects. So with Diti, the effects were Hiranyaksha and Hiranyakashipu, two people who were extremely full of passion and ignorance. By this, one can understand what was a problem with the original cause. And the problem was the extreme passion and ignorance that Diti was carrying. That was carried over into the 6th canto when she asked for a second child, where she carried an enmity towards Indra. That's in the mode of ignorance. She wanted to harm him. So devotional service with intention to harm is in the mode of ignorance. but one can understand the particular modes of nature that she was carrying. What is interesting to note, however, is that whilst there are certain things like regulations that one needs to follow and one can follow, without the shelter of devotional service, it's very, very hard to uphold those particular rules and regulations in the face of one's own desire. I wanted to actually also quote from the 8th canto, the Pastime of Aditi, in the appearance of Lord Vamandev. So, in the 8th canto Bhagavatam, I won't read the verses, but in the 8th canto Bhagavatam, later on, Hiranyakashipu's son, so great-grandson, Bali Maharaj, had just ousted the demigods from their planet. And Aditi was feeling great distress at seeing her own son's distress. But here's the thing, she'd never stopped her duties. Kashyapa had gone to the forest to meditate. She didn't stop her duties in the ashrama that she was maintaining on behalf of Kashyapa. In that ashrama, you had many disciples of Kashyapa, and you had the sacrificial fire that we heard about in this particular chapter. And Aditi never stopped maintaining the sacrificial fire, taking care of people there. And even when her husband came, she didn't present that as her desire. She controlled herself. My husband has come, he has his priorities. She had the mood of service from the very beginning. It is only when her husband saw that she was distressed and began to ask questions to inquire what the cause of her distress was. And that's when she said, see, our sons are distressed and this is causing me terrible pain. Can we do something about this? And she asked her husband for a solution. Diti did not do that. She had her own desire in both of those circumstances. And so that had to be, the second of which had to be modified with devotional service. But Aditi was a more surrendered soul to her spiritual master and her husband. She had a problem. She also had a material desire, her attachment to her sons, like Diti. However, she was devoted enough. She was surrendered enough to her husband to ask him for his solution. And his solution was to offer praise to the Supreme Lord, to invoke his presence, because by his presence, every need and desire would be fulfilled. And so then the subsequent chapter of the 8th canto, you see Aditi and Kashyapa offering prayers to the Supreme Lord, requesting his presence. And he appears extremely pleased with them, and he consents to become their son. And because he consents to appear as their son, not only are Aditi's and Kashyapa's, not only is Aditi's desire satisfied, but everybody in the world achieves auspiciousness. And that is the difference of example between Aditi and Diti. Both times Diti had her own strong desire for herself. And when